I'm not wearing heels to this temp job. I don't care if the building's made of gold. Veronica Lane muttered to herself, tugging her scuffed flats on while balancing a half-eaten granola bar in her mouth. She glanced at the crumpled paper with the address again: Bennett and Rowe Holdings, downtown LA, top floor. All she knew was it was some vague corporate firm and they needed a temporary assistant for the next 2 weeks. She needed the paycheck. Desperately. She shoved her resume into her tote, rolled her eyes at her own coffee stain on her blouse, and jogged toward the revolving glass doors of a building so shiny it made her squint. The lobby looked like it belonged to a movie set: white marble floors, gold accents, and a chandelier that could have paid off her student loans. The receptionist gave her a tight smile, clearly unimpressed by Veronica's wrinkled blazer. "Temp agency sent me," Veronica said, breathless. "Veronica Lane, I'm supposed to assist someone named a Mr. Easton Bennett." The woman clicked her heels like a robot. "Top floor, take the private elevator, don't be late." Veronica stepped into the elevator alone, watching the numbers rise as her heartbeat did too. What kind of man needed a temp assistant for 2 weeks? And why did it feel like her stomach was flipping inside out? When the elevator doors opened to a sleek private office that looked more like a luxury penthouse than a workspace, she almost turned around. And then she saw him. Easton Bennett stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, his sleeves rolled up, dark hair slightly tousled, and a phone pressed to his ear. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and looked like someone who had never once worried about overdraft fees. He turned, caught her staring, and ended the call. "You're the temp?" His voice was smooth, curious, not condescending. Veronica nodded. "Unless you were expecting someone taller and significantly more organized." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Come in." She followed him into the office, which had a wall of books, a bar cart with top-shelf liquor, and a couch that probably cost more than her car. "You'll be helping me directly," he said. "Calendar, correspondence, coffee, and whatever else comes up." "My assistant's out for 2 weeks on emergency leave." She opened her mouth to ask questions, but he was already handing her a tablet and walking toward a meeting room. "Hope you learn fast, Veronica." It was the way he said her name, like he knew her, like it mattered. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. Veronica was smart. Easton figured that out quickly. She didn't just manage his schedule, she anticipated things before he asked. She remembered the names of clients, fixed a presentation glitch that made his investors applaud, and once caught a typo on a contract that saved the company thousands. And he noticed. "You're not like any assistant I've had," Easton said one night as they worked late, Chinese takeout spread across the conference table. "Because I steal your dumplings?" she asked, half joking. "Because you make this place feel not cold." She looked up from her noodles, surprised. "You mean the office or you?" He didn't answer. Just gave her a look that made her heart pound. The next morning she found a box on her desk. Inside was a pair of designer shoes, simple, black, polished. He'd noticed her flats were worn out. She stormed into his office, holding the box. "What is this?" "Shoes," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity, it's comfort. You're on your feet all day. Let me do something nice." Veronica hesitated. "You don't even know me." That's when he looked up, really looked at her. "I'm starting to think I do." She sat across from him, the tension crackling like static. "You're different," he said. "You don't care who I am or what I do. You make this place feel alive." Something in his voice made her chest tighten. "What exactly do you do, Easton?" He paused. "I'm part owner of Bennett and Rowe. We handle acquisitions, investments, partnerships. I do a lot." She blinked. "You're the boss," he leaned back. "Technically, I'm half the company." Her throat went dry. "Then why didn't you say that?" "Because when I said it doesn't matter to you." "I meant it." She left his office that night with trembling hands. Something was happening. He started lingering, asking about her life, offering her coffee himself. One night, when a storm rolled in and the power flickered, he walked her to her car, jacket over her head, hand on her back. The next morning, he was colder, more distant. Like he'd remembered who he was and who she wasn't. But that didn't stop the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. On Friday, she dropped a folder on his desk and turned to leave. "Veronica," she turned. Come to dinner with me tonight. Her heart skipped. Like, dinner? Yes, she hesitated. Why? Because I can't stop thinking about you, and if I don't do something about it, I might lose my mind. She stared at him, unsure whether to run or say yes, but she didn't run. She said, okay, and everything changed. The restaurant was a rooftop glass box suspended above the city's soft jazz drifting over candlelit tables, waiters moving like shadows, and a panoramic view of Los Angeles that made Veronica feel like she was floating. She stood in front of the elevator for a full minute before stepping out onto the rooftop, heels clicking against polished stone, the dress she'd borrowed from her roommate hugging her at the waist. She hadn't known what to expect when she'd agreed to dinner, but it hadn't been this. Easton rose from the corner table before she reached him. You're late, she raised an eyebrow. 5 minutes, that's within fashionable. You're right, I stand corrected. He pulled out her chair, eyes scanning her face, not the dress, not her body, just her. You look different, cleaned up, she offered. Real, he said simply. The waiter appeared as if summoned by thought. There were no menus, just a bottle of wine uncorked without asking and 2 courses that arrived with elegant precision. What is this place? She asked, eyeing the delicate plate in front of her. It's not open to the public, belongs to a friend who owes me more than a few favors. Of course it does, he tilted his head. Does that bother you? I don't know. I think I'm still adjusting to the fact that you own half a company and have friends who own secret restaurants. Most people pretend to be impressed. I'm not most people. That's what I like about you. She didn't respond. Her fork hovered above her plate, her stomach a knot of nerves and curiosity. Why me, Easton? His eyes didn't flinch. Because every time I'm in a room full of people who call me sir and laugh at things I don't find funny, I think about how you rolled your eyes when you walked into my office. You don't care about the show, you don't want anything from me. That's not true, she said softly. He leaned forward. Then what do you want? I want to know why you're really sitting here with me, why you're doing this. Because this doesn't feel like something you do often. I don't, he said. I've had distractions, things that looked like relationships but weren't. Nobody's made me feel like I needed to slow down and actually look. Her heart beat faster. And now I can't stop looking. The wine tasted sweeter after that. They really talked. About music he listened to when he couldn't sleep, about the way she used to write short stories in college but never let anyone read them. He told her about the accident that took his father when he was 19 and how the silence afterward had been louder than the crash. The vulnerability in his voice wasn't rehearsed. She could tell. And when she told him about her mother's hospital bills and the job she'd lost last year, he didn't offer help or pity. He just listened. When the night ended, he walked her to the curb where a sleek black car waited, the driver already standing by the open door. She looked at him, unsure. You had a car waiting. I didn't want you to Uber home after drinking. Right, because you're thoughtful now. I've always been thoughtful. You just weren't looking. Inside the car, the world outside blurred. She kept her hands folded in her lap, unsure what to make of the man who'd spent the night peeling himself open like he'd been waiting for someone to see past the name on his building. He didn't call the next day, or the one after that. By Monday, she'd convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was a game. A bored millionaire entertaining himself with the girl who didn't know better. She walked into the office prepared to be professional, guarded, distant, but Easton wasn't at his desk. Instead, a man in a gray suit she didn't recognize greeted her with a clipped nod. Mr. Bennett's in New York for the week. I'll be coordinating in his absence. Her stomach dropped. No note, no explanation. By Wednesday, she was angry. Angry that she'd let herself fall for a dinner and a few kind words. Angry that someone who could afford to fly across the country couldn't be bothered to send a message before disappearing. That afternoon, a courier arrived with a package. No name, just her own scrawled across the top. Inside was a small notebook, leather-bound and worn at the edges. Her name was engraved along the spine. She flipped it open. The first page held a single line in Easton's handwriting. For every story you never told anyone, start here. She closed the notebook, fingers trembling. That night she didn't write anything, She stared at the blank page for hours, wondering if she could let herself believe this was real. The next morning, she wore the shoes he gave her, not because she'd forgiven him, but because he'd seen her, and she wasn't ready to stop being seen. By the time Friday rolled around, Veronica could no longer pretend she wasn't affected. She kept her head down, answered calls with clipped efficiency, and avoided the corner office like it was radioactive. Easton had been gone 4 days, and though she hadn't said a word about it to anyone at the firm, the silence between them had begun to feel like a splinter burrowed deep beneath her skin. She didn't talk about the notebook. She didn't write in it either. That morning, she was sorting contracts when the elevator pinged. The air in the office shifted. People straightened. Someone lowered their voice mid-laugh. She looked up. Easton was back. He walked through the glass doors in a navy suit, coat draped over one arm, his jaw set with a weariness that hadn't been there before. He paused just long enough to glance at her desk. Their eyes met. Brief, electric, then he kept walking. Veronica didn't follow. She didn't ask questions. She refused to give him the satisfaction of knowing she'd spent the week tangled in confusion, wondering if he'd regretted everything. But an hour later, his voice called out from his doorway. Veronica. A moment. She stepped inside, spine straight. He didn't look up from his laptop. How was your week? Efficient. Good. He closed the screen and leaned back. I owe you an explanation. No, she said. You don't. I'm a temp assistant. You don't owe me anything. His gaze sharpened. Don't do that. Don't shrink just because I pulled away. I'm not shrinking, she said evenly. I'm adjusting. He stood slowly. I went to New York because my mother had a health scare. She didn't want anyone to know, not the board, not the press. She's recovering, but it was a lot. Veronica's hands relaxed, but her voice stayed guarded. You could have told me. I didn't want to drag you into something personal when I didn't know what this was. She crossed her arms. You still don't. I know more than you think, he said. And I know that leaving without saying a word was a mistake. She studied him. You're used to people forgiving you without asking. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for another chance to get this right. She hesitated. Why now? Because when I was sitting in that hospital, I kept thinking about how quiet everything felt, and the only voice I wanted to hear was yours. She swallowed hard. You barely know me, but I see you, and that's more than I can say for most people in my life. It wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't fireworks, but it was honest. And something about the way he said it made the walls she'd built start to tremble. He stepped closer. Let me take you somewhere tonight. No pressure, no expectations, just something real. She weighed his words. The part of her that wanted to protect herself screamed no, but the part that had been aching for something genuine whispered yes. I'll go, she said, but I'm not dressing up for it. I wouldn't want you to, he said, a flicker of warmth returning to his eyes. Meet me on the street level at 6. When she arrived later that evening, he was leaning against a black vintage car she'd never seen before, sleeves rolled to his elbows, holding 2 paper cups from a corner coffee shop. You drive this? She asked, eyeing the polished curves of the car. My grandfather left it to me. It's temperamental, like most good things. He handed her a cup. Decaf with honey, am I right? She raised her eyebrows. Either you have a terrifying memory or you bribed someone. Just paid attention. They drove without a destination, windows down, city lights folding in around them. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It was peaceful, comfortable. Eventually, they pulled up to a quiet overlook above the city. No one else around. Just the distant hum of traffic and the glittering skyline stretching forever. He opened the trunk and pulled out a folded blanket and a brown bag. She watched, amused, as he spread it on the hood of the car and pulled out 2 sandwiches wrapped in deli paper. You brought dinner. You said you weren't dressing up. I figured a rooftop table was off the list. She took a bite. Okay, this is good, I know. I eat like a king and still miss this place. They sat shoulder to shoulder, legs dangling over the bumper, the night wrapping around them like a secret. Why did you send the notebook? She asked after a while. He glanced down at his hands. Because I saw the way you looked when you talked about writing, like it mattered, and I wanted to give you something that didn't have strings or expectations, just space. No one had ever done that for her. I haven't written anything yet, she admitted. You will. She turned to face him. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. The wind picked up, brushing hair across her face. Easton reached out, gently tucking it behind her ear. His hand lingered just long enough to make her breath catch. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything? Why do you do what you do? The company, the long hours, the empire. He leaned back on his palms. I used to think it was about building something that mattered. Then I thought it was about proving something. Now, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm still trying to figure that out. She nodded. At least you're honest about it. He turned to her, eyes darker now. Can I tell you what I am sure about? She didn't answer, but he didn't wait. I haven't stopped thinking about you since the first day you walked into my office with that coffee-stained blouse and the world's most determined expression. She laughed. That's a terrible opening line. He reached for her hand. Then let me try a better one, and then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't planned. It was the kind of kiss that stripped everything else away, the tension, the questions, the fear, and left only the truth between them. When they pulled apart, she didn't say anything. She just leaned her head on his shoulder and for once let herself breathe. Veronica stepped into the office on Monday morning and paused. Her desk had been replaced. Gone was the scratched rental table from the temp agency. In its place stood a sleek walnut desk, curved and polished, with a matching leather chair. A brass nameplate sat at the edge. Veronica Lane, executive assistant to the CEO. She glanced toward Easton's office. The door was open, but he was nowhere in sight. Good morning, Miss Lane, said a familiar voice behind her. She turned to find Claire, Easton's original assistant, carrying a tablet and smiling. You're back, Veronica said, both surprised and uneasy. I am, but I'm transitioning to the operations team. Easton made it clear you're staying, permanently. Veronica blinked. He didn't mention that. Claire handed her the tablet. He will. He's just running late from a board meeting. Check your inbox. By the time Veronica sat down, her heart was pounding. Not because of the promotion, though that alone was staggering, but because it meant Easton had made a decision without asking her. Again, when he walked in an hour later, unbothered and already on a call, she didn't look up. He stepped into her office without knocking. Want to tell me why you look like someone just canceled your birthday? You made a permanent decision about my job without talking to me. He leaned against the doorway. Didn't think I needed to ask, considering you've been running the place better than I do. That's not the point, she said sharply. You can't keep making choices for me. Easton crossed the room slowly. You're right. She looked up, startled. I should have asked, he said. But I wanted you here, and I guess I let that override everything else. Veronica studied him. What if I don't want to stay? Then I'd be an idiot, he said, but I'd accept it. Her voice softened. You're not used to needing people, are you? I'm used to people needing me, he admitted. But you're the first person I've ever needed who didn't need anything in return. She stood and walked around the desk, stopping in front of him. I want to stay, but not because you gave me a better chair. He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. Then why? Because I like who I am when I'm around you, and I haven't liked myself in a long time. He reached up, brushing his thumb along her jaw. You should always like yourself. You're brilliant. You're impossible. And you make it very hard to pretend I don't want everything with you. Her breath caught. Then stop pretending. That night, he took her somewhere no one else had ever been invited, his home. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse that overlooked the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the space like a glass crown, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and something warmer like cinnamon or memory. This is where you live, she asked, stepping in cautiously. I don't bring people here, he said, locking the door behind them. Not ever. She wandered toward the shelves lining the far wall. They were filled with old books, photos in silver frames, and one frayed college hoodie folded neatly on the edge of a bench. You went to Stanford, she asked, touching the fabric gently. Dropped out my third year, he said. My father died. I had to take over his shares and keep the company from falling apart. She turned to face him, suddenly seeing the younger version of Easton, the boy who'd had to become a man too fast. No one ever gave you time to grieve, did they? He shook his head. Grief isn't profitable. She walked to him and took his hand. But it's human. They didn't talk much after that. Instead, they sat on the couch with their legs tangled together and an old jazz record spinning in the background. She rested her head on his chest, and for the first time in years, he let someone see the part of him he never showed. The next morning, she woke to the smell of espresso and the sound of distant piano keys. He was in the kitchen, barefoot, wearing a white t-shirt and humming under his breath. "You hum?" she asked, leaning on the doorframe. "Only when I'm happy." She walked over, took the mug from his hands and sipped. "Good, keep humming." Later that week, he took her to a gala. She hadn't wanted to go. Too many eyes, too many whispered questions, but he insisted. "It's a charity event for literacy programs. You'd be doing them a favor by showing up." She hesitated. "What will people say?" "That I'm lucky," he said, and kissed her forehead. When they arrived, the room paused, cameras flashed. She wore a navy satin gown he'd had tailored for her without asking. But this time she didn't mind. The way he looked at her when she walked down the stairs made every step feel worth it. Halfway through the night, a woman approached her near the champagne table. Elegant, poised, with sharp eyes. "You're Veronica," she said. "I'm Cecilia Rowe, Easton's business partner." Veronica straightened. "Nice to meet you." "I've never seen him bring anyone to one of these," Cecilia said, studying her. "He seems different." Veronica offered a small smile. "Maybe he is." Cecilia took a sip of her drink, then nodded. Good, he needed someone who would challenge him. As the evening wore on, Easton found her again, taking her hand and leading her outside to the balcony. The city lights stretched endlessly below. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's dangerous. I want to build something with you, not just a life, a legacy." She shook her head, laughing. "You're impossible, but I'm serious." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. "Wait, it's not a ring," he said quickly. "Not yet." "But it's a key." She opened it. A delicate gold key rested inside. "To your apartment?" she asked. "To a place I bought yesterday for us, on the coast, with space for a studio so you can write, and I can finally learn how to stop." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "You can say no. You can throw it at me and walk away, but I had to try." She closed the box gently, then slid it into her clutch. "I'm not walking away," she said. "But I'm not moving in because you're Easton Bennett." "Then why?" "Because you loved me before I believed I deserved it." He let out a breath he'd been holding since the night they met. "I'm still learning how to love," he said, "but I want to keep learning with you." She stepped into his arms. "Then let's build something." And when he kissed her under the stars, surrounded by the city he once ruled alone, Veronica Lane knew she wasn't just someone passing through his life. She was the reason he'd finally stopped running. The wind off the coast rolled through the open windows, carrying the scent of salt and pine into the living room. Veronica stood barefoot on the stone terrace of the new house Easton had bought, though he insisted it was theirs, watching the ocean in the distance blur into the sky. The house wasn't massive like his penthouse, but it was elegant in a quieter way. Wood-beamed ceilings, hand-laid tile floors, and a study already filled with blank journals, and a vintage typewriter he'd found in a tucked-away bookstore in Carmel. He padded in behind her, still damp from the shower, a towel slung over his shoulder and his shirt half-buttoned. "You've been staring at the horizon for 20 minutes. "I'm mentally outlining a story," she replied, not turning. "Does it have a brooding millionaire who falls in love with someone smarter than him?" She smiled. "No, this one's about a woman trying to figure out what it means to stop surviving and actually live." He stepped beside her and looked out. "Then I hope she figures it out. She's starting to." They didn't speak for a while. The waves answered for them. Later that day, they drove inland to meet Cecilia Rowe at a vineyard Easton had been negotiating for quietly, though he hadn't told Veronica why until they were already halfway there. "It's going to be a nonprofit retreat center," he said, one hand on the steering wheel. "For kids in the foster system. My mother was in it when she was young. She never talks about it, but I've seen what it did to her." Veronica turned to him. "You've never mentioned that before." She didn't want it to be part of her narrative, but I think it matters. And I think if we're going to do something with meaning, it should start with the people who never get a second look. She reached over and slid her fingers into his. "You don't have to prove that you're good, Easton, but you are." He glanced at her. and for the first time, the self-assured mask he wore in boardrooms and interviews softened into something more vulnerable. I want to build more than companies. I want to build something that outlasts me. When they arrived, Cecilia was already there speaking with the architect. She greeted Veronica with a nod and handed Easton a folder. I signed off, she said. And I added your name to the foundation paperwork, Veronica. You'll be co-director. Veronica blinked. What? Easton didn't look at her. You've been saying for months you want to write stories that matter. This whole place is a story waiting to be told, and you're the only one I trust to tell it right. She opened the folder. The letterhead bore both their names. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes. She closed the folder. Then yes. They returned home that night with dirt still on their shoes and wine stains on their sleeves. He cooked while she read aloud from a manuscript she'd started the week before. Between the sizzle of the skillet and the scratch of her pen, the house pulsed with quiet joy. A knock came just after they finished eating. Easton opened the door to find his mother standing there, hair pinned in a twist, a silk scarf trailing from her wrist. I was in the area, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. And I thought maybe I should meet the woman who finally got you to slow down. Veronica wiped her hands on a towel. It's lovely to meet you. His mother studied her with sharp, assessing eyes. He's different, calmer. I don't know what you've done, but thank you. Veronica didn't answer, just walked over to Easton and laced her fingers with his. His mother's eyes softened. They sat on the porch until the sun vanished, the three of them talking about nothing and everything. When his mother finally stood to leave, she kissed her son's cheek and turned to Veronica. Keep him grounded, she said. He needs someone who reminds him he's still human. After she left, Easton exhaled slowly. She's not usually that forthcoming. She's not the only one learning how to let people in. He kissed her forehead. Come with me. He led her upstairs to the rooftop garden he'd been building in secret. Twinkling lights strung between wooden beams illuminated a raised platform with a table, 2 chairs, and a blanket already laid out beneath a canopy. She blinked. What is this? I wanted to do this right. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, not flashy, not oversized. Delicate vintage sapphire in the center. I wasn't sure what love was supposed to look like, but then you showed up in my life like a storm I never saw coming, and suddenly everything made sense. She didn't speak. Her eyes glistened under the soft lights. I don't want perfection. I want the arguments, the quiet, the mornings where we don't say much. The nights we stay up rereading old drafts of your work and burning dinner. I want you, as you are, every day. He went down on one knee. Marry me, she laughed through the tears. Only if you promise to never try to outright me. He slid the ring on her finger. I'll happily lose that battle. They kissed, and the world fell away again. The wedding was small, held in the garden of the new retreat center just as the first phase of construction wrapped. Cecilia officiated. His mother wore the same scarf. Veronica's brother, who'd flown in from Oregon, cried more than anyone. The guests danced under the stars. Veronica's dress had pockets. Easton couldn't stop staring at her. Afterward, they disappeared to a cottage in the Alps, where she finally finished her first book, and he spent mornings sketching designs for a literacy initiative they would launch that fall. At night, they read to each other by the fire. And every time she looked up from her page and found him watching her, she knew he wasn't just her beginning. He was the story.